أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فذكر فما أنت بنعمة ربك بكاهن ولا مجنون. أم يقولون شاعر نتربص به ريب المنون. قل تربصوا فإني معكم من المتربصين. أم تأمرهم أحلامهم بهذا أم هم قوم طاغون. أم يقولون تقوله بل لا يؤمنون. فليأتوا بحديث مثله إن كانوا صادقين. أم خلقوا من غير شيء أم هم الخالقون. أم خلقوا من غير شيء أم هم الخالقون. أم خلقوا السماوات والأرض بل لا يوقنون. أم عندهم خزائن ربك أم هم المسيطرون. أم لهم سلم يستمعون فيه فليأت مستمعهم بسلطان مبين. أم له البنات ولكم البنون. أم تسألهم أجرا فهم من مغرم مثقلون. أم عندهم الغيب فهم يكتبون. أم يريدون كيدا فالذين كفروا هم المكيدون. أم لهم إله غير الله سبحان الله عما يشركون. وإن يروا كسفا من السماء ساقطا يقولوا سحاب مركوم. فذرهم حتى يلاقوا يومهم الذي فيه يصعقون. Therefore proclaim thou the praises of thy Lord, for by the grace of thy Lord thou art no vulgar soothsayer, nor art thou one possessed. Or do they say, a poet, we await for him some calamity hatched by time? Say you, await ye, I too will wait along with you. Is it that their faculties of understanding urge them to this, or are they but a people transgressing beyond bounds? Or do they say, he fabricated the message? Nay, they have no faith. Let them then produce a recital like unto it, if it be they speak the truth. Were they created of nothing, or were they themselves the creators? Or did they create the heavens and the earth? Nay, they have no firm belief. Or are the treasures of thy Lord with them, or are they the managers of affairs? Or have they a ladder by which they can climb up to heaven and listen to its secrets? Then let such a listener of theirs produce a manifest proof. Or has he only daughters and ye have sons? Or is it that thou dost ask for a reward, so that they are burdened with load of debt? Or that the unseen in it their hands, and they write it down? Or do they intend a plot against thee? But those who defy Allah are themselves involved in a plot. Or have they a God other than Allah, exalted as Allah, far above the things they associate with Him? Were they to see a piece of the sky falling on them, they would only say, clouds gathered in heaps. So leave them alone until they encounter that day of theirs, wherein they shall perforce swoon with terror. Sadaqallahu al-Azim.
Just going to go through the article, inshallah. So Saburi is going to be speaking for about 30 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes, inshallah. And then after that, when it comes to Maghrib, it's going to come in around 5:30. we're going to have a break, and then we can help ourselves to refreshments on the side. And yeah, without further ado, I'll pass it over to Subur, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
This is the north. I came from the south. The greeting should be a bit more energetic. Assalamu alaikum, and this is a dua. It means peace be upon you. The answer is?
Walaikum assalam.
Thank you. So there's more than zombies up north. So, what I'm going to speak about today is something which I think is very important. In the Quran, God, our Creator, says, in the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of night and day, there are signs for those with intelligence. And the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he is somebody who came to connect us, mankind, back to our Creator. Now, one of the things the Quran speaks about a lot is studying nature, trying to understand that this nature that we are studying is something which is a sign of God, something which should lead us in awe of God. Just a few weeks ago, I was watching Blue Planet 2. I don't know if anybody here has actually seen that. That sort of program, no one can watch except they think to themselves that, subhanallah, who made this? Where did this come from? We have amazing creatures. We have fish which actually start to, for a few seconds, fly. I don't know if anybody's seen those parts. We actually have absolutely phenomenal types of tigers. And these sort of tigers, when they are attacking things like crocodiles, they know at the back of the crocodile there is a weak spot. That weak spot where they grab onto and they take away. We have river dolphins. We have this extraordinary diversity of life, and we even have fish actually doing art, actually making patterns at the bottom of the sea. Now Allah says in the Quran, God says in the Quran that nature is something that we should look into. Allah says, do you not think? Do you not reflect? Do you not use your reason? So it's a bit of a surprise that some people look into nature, some people study nature, and rather than saying, okay, this nature, this beautiful creation of God is something which leads me closer to God, they actually say, no, this actually undermines the existence of God. So the question we're going to be addressing today is, does Darwinian evolution actually undermine God? And why is it that something which is supposed to bring us closer to God is actually taking us further away? Now this handsome bloke, his name is Julian Huxley, very important evolutionary biologist from the early part of the 20th century. He was one of the main figures in what's known as the modernization of evolutionary theory, what's known as Neo-Darwinism. He was the great-grandson of T.H. Huxley. And Julian Huxley was actually an evolutionary biologist and an atheist philosopher, and he believed that nature has told us about this evolutionary process, and this evolutionary process is leading us in a direction away from all religions. In fact, in 1927, he wrote a book called Religion Without Revelation. And in this book, he promotes a religion which he calls evolutionary humanism. He believes that this religion is going to replace Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Taoism, Lady Gaga, whatever religion is out there. Now, that understanding of science, of evolutionary theory, then of course, to the question, does Darwinian evolution undermine God? The answer is yes. But if we have a mainstream scientific understanding of Darwin's theory, according to mainstream philosophers of science and according to mainstream evolutionary biologists, then no, Darwinian evolution does not undermine God. But from a popular understanding of people like Julian Huxley, then it actually does. So who is right? Is Julian Huxley right? Or is mainstream academia right? Now, evolutionary humanism is a very interesting thing. You can sort of summarize it into these sort of views. It assumes science leads to truth, so think about that. It's openly atheistic, and it is a fully fledged religious worldview. In fact, 2 years ago roughly, Michael Ruse, he's an atheist philosopher of science, he wrote a book called Darwinism as Religion, which was published by Oxford University, and this book speaks about how Darwin's theory was way more than science from the very beginning. So just think about these terms. Think about these statements which I'm about to read out. This is from the Oxford professor Richard Dawkins in his book, The Blind Watchmaker. Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Now, is that statement scientific? Doesn't really look like it is. Another atheist evolutionary biologist, Yuval Noah Harari, he has a very popular book. I'm not sure if you guys have seen it, Sapiens. It's in W.H. Smith. I recently saw it at the airport. It's heavily promoted. And this is what he says. And remember, he's a scientist writing a book about science. And this statement, let's see if it's actually a scientific statement. There are no gods in the universe, no nations, no money, no human rights, no laws, no justice outside the common imagination of human beings. Okay, that doesn't really seem like a scientific statement. That seems like a statement about morality, a statement about theology, a statement about things of a philosophical nature. But that's in a science book. That's in a book written by a scientist. So it's not just a theory. Darwinian evolution is a valid scientific theory model paradigm, but it's not just a theory. Some people have made it into more than just a theory, which is the actual problem. Now, these are some of the implications of Darwinian evolution not just being a scientific theory. Lynn Margulis, she is an atheist evolutionary biologist. She called Darwinian evolution, and she is a very prominent biologist, she called it an Anglo-Saxon religion. That's what she considered neo-Darwinism. Masatashi Nai, another atheist evolutionary biologist from Japan, he doesn't believe in the Darwinian model of evolution, he believes in a different model, because evolution and Darwinian evolution are two different things. And what he basically says is that Darwin, in our field, has become into a god, and you cannot actually challenge him, and this is bad for science. So evolutionary humanism has two particular ideas, and I'm going to, inshallah, God willing, break those ideas down and show that they're actually not true. Remember, this is the popular understanding of evolutionary biology, which they've morphed into evolutionary humanism, that the academic understanding obviously doesn't say these things. So this is the popular understanding, and this is what we're going to challenge based on mainstream academics. So, science leads to truth, that's the first one we're going to deal with. Do we have a moral obligation to this child? Now, there is a child who is asking for help, and if someone says, I believe in science, right? And I remember a few years ago when I finished work, I went to an internet cafe, I spoke to someone who's the owner of the cafe, and I said to him, do you believe in God? And he replied, I believe in science. So, the answer, I believe in science, let's see if he can actually resolve this problem using science. So there's a child that needs help. Our moral obligation to help this child, can we put that through the scientific method? Can we test right and wrong using test tubes and goggles and thermometers? And can we use scientific equipment to actually do that? Of course not. Morality is something we all believe in, I hope so, but it's not something that you can actually put through the scientific method. Okay, did Genghis Khan exist? Genghis Khan is a historical figure. No one knows where his grave is. He existed some couple of hundred years ago. Now, if you were to use science to try and find out whether he existed, you can't. His existence is based on historical testimonies, which is another form of knowledge, apart from morality, which science cannot explain, which science relies on. Okay, do you have a great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather? Raise your hand if you do. Okay, some people didn't raise their hands, so maybe they popped into existence 5 minutes ago. Most of us here, we do actually have ancestry. Now, ancestry of this sort, going back maybe 10, 15 or 100 generations, is not something you can actually put through the scientific method. This is based on logic. We exist, so our parents must exist, so their parents must exist, so their parents must exist, and so on. This is logic. This is not based on science. Science needs logic. Okay, does Micronesia exist? Micronesia is a country somewhere in the Pacific. Now, if I was to ask you, prove to me scientifically that this country exists, you of course can't. All that you have is the testimony of geographers, again, testimonial knowledge. Solve this equation using, anyone study maths here? Do they teach maths at MNU?
Yes, they do.
Fantastic. Okay, sister, can you solve this equation using science? She shook her head, meaning no, she can't. Why is that? Because this is not based on science. If you have to resolve that formula, if you have to find the answer to that, you can't actually use science. You just have to use mathematics. Science needs maths. Science needs logic. Science needs testimony. Science needs these philosophical assumptions. It's not based on, it can't prove these things. Okay, so basic thing, this is a type of logical flow. If all A are B and all B are C, then all A are C. Okay, another way of putting it is John is a man, men are made of cells, therefore John is made of cells. Simple logical flow. This simple logical flow is not, again, based on science. This is pure deduction. Again, science needs this, science can't actually prove this. Okay, so you come home and your mum makes you a cake and it says, I love you. Now this cake, can science tell you why your mother made this cake? It can tell you the certain temperature it was baked on, it can tell you the chemical composition of the cream, it can tell you certain things about its texture, but it can't tell you the why. Science is an explanation of how the world works, not why it exists. So for example, I have this microphone thingy, right? I can explain how this works using science. I can explain about signals, about electricity, about circuits, and so on. Imagine I gave an explanation of how this works. Does that mean there's no why? There's no creator of this thing? Because I've explained how it works, there is no why. So science is an attempt to explain how the world works. It doesn't explain why it exists or who made it. The why questions are not scientific questions. Okay, metaphysics. Things that we believe. We believe the world is real. We believe other people have minds. We believe the past is real. We believe our minds are trustworthy. These are all things which are unprovable. Science presupposes these things. Science can't actually prove them. Okay, science is a wonderful method and it's brought us loads of amazing things, and it came from the Muslim world, by the way. That's something we can talk about in the Q&A, and there's lots of evidence for that, the scientific method itself. Now, but it's not the only route of knowledge. It's one route of knowledge. In today's society where, you know, we have Facebook, Instagram, and, Periscope and all these types of things, and we're utilizing the gifts of science all the time, we start to think, this is the way to look at the world, science. But no, science is a great tool to try and understand how things work. It's not the only route of knowledge. If you say, like the guy said, when I spoke to him, I said, do you believe in God? He said, I believe in science, right? If someone has this crude understanding of science, which is known as scientism, science is the only way of looking at the world, and science leads to truth, and so on, well, 99% of your beliefs, which you hold to be rational, you have to throw out. Because we all believe in right and wrong. We believe running over a child with a car for no reason is wrong. Well, you can't prove that scientifically. Giving charity is good. You can't prove that scientifically. It cannot answer any of the why questions, but the questions that we ask are why questions. It cannot answer metaphysical questions. It cannot resolve mathematics or logical problems. In fact, it depends on them. Testimonial truths, which we all believe, right? We believe the existence of Plato, of Oliver Cromwell, and so on. And all of the historical stuff we know is not based on science. 99% of our beliefs are not scientific. In fact, the statement, I believe in science, is an unscientific statement. You can't actually test that. So what is science? This is the second part. Remember the first part was? Anyone awake? The first part was science is not the only way of looking at the world. This is the second part. Science doesn't lead to absolute truth. No one claims it does academically. This is a popular misunderstanding. So how does science actually work? Well, you want to resolve a problem, you go out in the world, you look at observations, you come up with a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis again and again and again, and you come up with a theory, and that theory over time becomes a sort of paradigm. Okay, why is science amazing? Because it works. We can actually use it to make predictions, and those predictions come true. So for example, the way that Newton's laws were used throughout the 19th and 18th century to make predictions which were confirmed. But the issue with the popular understanding of science is that science leads to truth. But the academic understanding of the philosophy of science is science doesn't lead to truth, it leads to workable models. It leads to, if you want to call it truth, if you want to call it fact, with a little t or a little f, because it can get revised. So think of the black swan problem. I'm a scientist, and I decide one day I want to find out what the colour of swans are in Manchester. I decide to sit on a park bench and just watch swans. And I have my little notebook. This one's white, this one's white, this one's white, this one's white, this one's white. And I come up with a general theory based upon my limited data. All swans are white. Fantastic. But then one day, a black swan comes, and my theory that all swans are white is being challenged. This is known as the problem of induction, or the black swan problem. So you can always have new data which can challenge your previous theory. No person has access to all data. In fact, within the context of evolutionary biology, 99.999% of species, not organisms, species, are unobserved. We have no idea what they look like, we don't have their fossils, we don't have their DNA, we don't have anything like that. So anything we try and make up in the history is going to be very probabilistic. Okay, another problem is known in the philosophy of science as underdetermination of theory by observation. So, what the problem is, in a very simple way, is this. You've got this scatter graph, and on this scatter graph you have some points, and I deliberately set it up in that way, and someone can come along and say, okay, it's going to be a straight line. Someone else can say it's going to be a curve. Someone else can say it can be an inverse curve. Many different interpretations are valid based upon the same data. The scatter graph problem is one of the reasons, other than that problem of induction, that science doesn't lead to absolute truth, because you can always have an alternative explanation for the data. So because of these two reasons, science doesn't lead to absolute truth. And academically, no one has ever claimed it does. Now, what doesn't obviously change is direct observation. So, the shape of the Earth, H2O, fossils, stars, and so on. But this is a misunderstanding. People think science is the same as observation. So, we know the shape of the Earth, and the shape of the Earth is science, therefore science is true, because the shape of the Earth is true. No, that's a misunderstanding. We could, and we did actually, the Greeks, funnily enough, they calculated the circumference of the Earth, 2,000-3,000 years ago. They did that. That wasn't based on science, that was mathematics. So science is more than just observations. It's actually using observations to come up with theories. And that's what that point's about. But the thing is, science can always change. You can always have new data which challenges your previous theory. So for example, Newton had this amazing model, the Newtonian model of the universe. The Newtonian model of the universe is something which worked for over 200 years and something which was repeatedly confirmed. So, if I was a physicist and I was using Newton's models, here's what I would do. I would say, where is this planet going to be in 5 years from now, based upon what I know right now? So I'll sit down, I'll make some calculations, and I'll make a prediction into the future, and guess what? If I wait 5 years, and I look out there, it will be there. Just like that, to the very T, the Newtonian model worked well for 200 years. Now something that works well for 200 years, people are going to start saying it's true, or it's a fact, or it's, it's never going to change. But the problem is, Einstein came along after 200 years of the Newtonian model working quite well, and he said, guys, I'm really sorry to burst your bubble, but Newton was wrong. The Newtonian model, here's some of the things that Einstein changed. He said, well, if we go back and we look at those amazing formulas that Newton was using to come up with predictions, well, you see the word mass, it has the incorrect definition. It actually has a different definition. He also said that gravity, remember the apple falling, right, is no longer a pulling force, it's actually being pushed due to space-time curvature, so he inversed it. And time and space were supposed to be fixed, according to the Newtonian model, and Einstein gave the most bizarre idea that actually it's like cloth, it's like space-time curvature. So he totally changed the assumptions of something that worked for over 200 years, and it still works. Now, there's some people who don't believe we went to the moon, but for the sake of the presentation, I'm going to assume we did. We went to the moon based upon the Newtonian model. The Newtonian, even after Einstein showed that the assumptions were incorrect. So we went to the moon based upon a scientific theory which is incorrect or incomplete, right? So you have say you have a student at Manchester MMU and he has one of these cars. I know nothing about cars, so it's a blue car. I don't know what model it is. So you have this blue car. In this blue car, he has these nitrogen boosters. These help him go really, really fast so he can show off. Now this guy, he has these boosters, and I come up to him and I say to him, that's really nice boosters and your car's going really, really fast, but I just want to say something, right? Your car is based upon, the nitrogen that you're using, these boosters that you're using, that element of nitrogen was discovered using a theory in chemistry which is now believed to be false. He's going to say, huh? So, we're using nitrogen, we've discovered nitrogen, but we discovered it using something which was false, which was the theory of phlogiston. So, theories work even when they're wrong, and there's lots of philosophical literature on this too. Theories work even when they contradict each other. And we're going to have a physics debate. This time, if you go up to a physicist and you say to them, right, is the theory of general relativity workable? Is it something that gives us predictions? Is it something that works well? The physicist is going to say, professor is going to say, of course. You ask him the same thing about quantum mechanics, he's going to say, of course. But both of these theories contradict each other. They can't both be true, but they both work. Today, in physics. So science doesn't lead to absolute truth, and we have live examples in front of us, and we have historical examples. In fact, the history of chemistry, physics, biology has shown us that scientific theories in every area can be revised and can be changed. Now this is obviously something you have to know, you'll only notice if you look at history over a long period of time, because we've had the scientific method for 1,000 years. If you're just living in that small snippet like we are now, you may not be able to notice that. Now, Darwinian evolution is based upon the idea of the working assumption of methodological naturalism. Methodological naturalism is basically this. Whatever we are going to study as scientists, we're going to assume there's no God, we're going to assume there is no soul, we're going to assume there is no immaterial mind, we're going to assume there's no such thing as morality from, a physical perspective. So this is just an assumption in science. So imagine we're scientists, we walk into this room, we adopt this assumption. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with this assumption. But this assumption basically means that when a scientist is working within the field of science, he or she says that we are only going to use natural effects being explained by natural causation. So the way that Richard Lewontin, an evolutionary biologist, explains it from Harvard is this. We are forced by our a priori, meaning before experience, adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and set of concepts that produce material explanations, cause and effect. No matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated, moreover that materialism is an absolute, for we cannot allow a divine end law. This is an assumption of evolutionary biology and of science in general. Methodological naturalism is conflated falsely with philosophical naturalism, which is why we have this confusion. Philosophical naturalism is there is no God. Methodological naturalism is when we're working in science, we're going to assume God's direct activity is not visible. Or it's a working assumption, there is no soul. There is a working assumption, there is no immaterial mind, and so on and so forth. The way the atheist evolutionary biologist Scott Todd explains it is this. Even if all the data points to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from science because it's not naturalistic. Methodological naturalism. Of course, the scientist as an individual is free to embrace a reality that transcends naturalism. Okay? So methodological naturalism and philosophical naturalism are two things. One doesn't lead to the other. Methodological naturalism doesn't lead to philosophical naturalism, but philosophical naturalism does lead this way. But the confusion between the two terms is what leads to the popular and the academic misunderstandings. Now, what does methodological naturalism entail for biology? It entails there's no design. So whatever we see, no matter how complex, no matter how amazing, there's no design. This is an assumption before they look at evidence. There's no independent ancestry. So human beings will always be linked to something else. You can't say human beings appeared in the history of life without being linked to something else. And naturalistic purpose. So for example, in The Selfish Gene, Richard Dawkins says, the highest rationale for human existence is to survive and reproduce. Right? So that obviously contradicts the Islamic view, or the biblical view, or the Buddhist view. You'll always get a naturalistic purpose from that perspective. So the way Francis Crick explains no design, biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed but rather evolved. So if I was to take off all the labels off that particular diagram and I was to show how that particular thing functions, any engineer would say that's design. But in biology, a priori, you can't say that. No separate ancestry. Human beings will always be linked to something else in nature. That's just a working assumption in science. The way the atheist evolutionary biologist Gareth Nelson explains it is this. We've got to have some ancestors, meaning who? Human beings. We'll pick those. Why? Because we know they have to be there. Methodological naturalism. And these are the best candidates. That's by and large the way it's worked, and I'm not exaggerating. He is not ridiculing the field because he's involved in the field. He's just explaining the way it actually works. It's a thought experiment. Okay? Imagine there were no such thing as apes. There were no chimpanzees, no orangutans, nothing like that. You couldn't come up with a hypothesis that human beings appeared in the history of life without being linked to something else. But if I wanted to make up a hypothesis that human beings and pigs have a common ancestor, and by the way, there's some similarities between human beings and pigs which don't exist between human beings and chimps. There's the heart valve, you can take insulin from a pig and stick it in a human being, it'll work. The skin of a pig you can take and you can use it for human skin grafting and so on and so forth. So there's similarities between human beings and pigs which don't exist between human beings and chimps. This would still be something which is scientific, even though biologists would not accept it unless there were no chimps. But the idea that human beings are not linked to something else in nature is a priori, meaning before evidence rejected. So, Darwinian evolution, to summarize, and no evolutionary biologist in the world is going to deny this. Let me say that again. No evolutionary biologist in the world is going to deny this, unless they're outright lying, which I hope no one will. And I've had conversations with evolutionary biologists, and this is not something which is uncontroversial. This is not something which is controversial. Darwinian evolution is based on a probabilistic framework, which has assumptions, which has disputes at a conceptual and a scientific level. So just to wrap up, does Darwinian evolution undermine God? It undermines God if we have a popular understanding of evolutionary biology, a misunderstanding of evolutionary biology, evolutionary humanistic understanding. If Darwinian evolution is based on a mainstream scientific understanding, then no, it does not undermine God. Okay, last slide. What we need to do is we need to understand that we live in a world where we've got this popular idea that the only way of looking at the world is the scientific way of looking at the world. That's incorrect. Because like we saw before, if you say I believe in science and you look at the world purely through a scientific worldview, 99% of your beliefs are challenged. In fact, science can't function because science is based upon those things like maths and logic and testimony and metaphysical truths which can't actually be proven. Now, the Islamic perspective, and in fact, it's not only the Islamic perspective, you could be an atheist and hold this perspective, is that there's a whole bunch of ways of looking at the world, not just science. You can use your reason, you can use empirical data, self-evident truths. So what's a self-evident truth? We hear this thing, I don't believe in anything unless it can be proven. That's total nonsense. We believe the world is real, can't prove it. We believe our minds are trustworthy, can't prove it. We believe truth exists as an objective thing, can't prove it. We believe morality exists, can't prove it. You get the point. Maths and logic, again, this is not based on science. Science needs this. Introspection, testimony, which is how we get the majority of our knowledge. However, from an Islamic perspective, we have something that we can actually share, which is additional to all the rest of the ways of looking at the world, which is what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ actually spoke about. He said, every child is born upon the fitrah. What is the fitrah? Fitrah is the innate, natural state in which a human being recognizes God. However, the Prophet said, society, parents change their religion. So, when a person tries to reason about the world in an objective way, putting aside their emotions, putting aside the societal pressures, and they try and look at the world using their reason, using their aql, then the fitrah can be uncovered. The fitrah can also be uncovered when someone has a spiritual experience, when they hear the Quran, when they hear the azan. The fitrah can especially be uncovered, and Allah mentions this in the Quran, God mentions this in the Quran, when a human being goes through a test. And I've had direct experiences of speaking to atheists who used to, and they still don't believe in God, but they still don't believe in religion. When they were in a situation, like there's a guy, I think his story fits best here. He's somebody who grew up in a household which did not have the belief in God. His parents were atheists, he grew up as an atheist, and he was an atheist all his life until his 30s or 40s. And then when he got into a very serious situation, he called out to God for help, and then he started believing in God after that point. Here's the thing, who taught him how to pray? Who taught him that there is somebody that can hear his prayers? This is the fitrah. And the fitrah is uncovered in times of tribulation. There's somebody who's young, they've got their full life ahead of them. As soon as they find out they have cancer, their psychological state changes, their religious views change. The fitrah can become uncovered by a experience like that. So the fitrah is something that we as Muslims believe is always there, and it can be something which can be uncovered through spiritual experiences, through reason, or through other means as well. So when we look at the world, we should not look at the world from a very narrow, binary way of looking. We should look at the world from a holistic way of actually looking. God has the picture, we only as human beings have the pixel. Everything good I've said is from God, Allah. Every mistake is my own. I thank you very much for listening, and we'll do the Q&A after Maghrib, inshallah.